Paths. Why are they so powerful, and why are they so unique that I would take the time to make a video just about paths in Dungeondraft? And what are paths? Essentially, paths are just what they sound like, a polygon that can curve. So you can make a straight line and cause that geometry and the texture assigned to it to follow that curved path. But why is that so powerful? There are only two programs I have ever used that have this power: Dungeondraft and Clip Studio Paint. Not even the almighty Photoshop has the ability to do this. You can do objects, which are static, which is great for something like a tree or a single light. But what if you wanted to put a bunch of lights around a roof? You could go in and use your object tool and select your lights. In this case, I want to go above the walls so you can see them, and manually place each and every one and make sure they're aligned, which they're not. But when you're building maps very quickly, something like this can come in handy. Make sure we are above the walls in this case. And as you can see, it just lays out the light bulbs as they go. Now, paths have an inherent disadvantage, which is they have a tendency to distort as you go around edges. So this isn't terribly useful in all cases, but especially if you're moving fast and you have a big building that has a long section that needs the light bulbs on it, that's a quick way to do it. Another option might be to make them a little smaller and then just use the path tool to do the long segments, and then don't do the curves, like so. And then you can come back in with the object tool and manually place the individual bulbs to kind of balance things out. But to go further, paths can be used for lighting quite effectively. Since they can curve, you can very quickly throw down some ambient occlusion around your walls, or you might want to have some barrels. Let's say they're on a ship. You wouldn't want them being tossed about in rough seas, so here is a ratchet strap, which can go up and over these barrels, and I can shape that really quickly without much trouble using the path tool. And then come back in here and tell it to fade on both ends of the path. Go underneath all paths. We can give the impression of shadows. Now, one trick with paths, if you need a Dungeondraft, is just like a lot of things, you can click, and I'm not clicking and holding, I'm just clicking. Click for my second point, and I can either continue to another point, or I can hold Shift, click my next point, and instead of continuing, I'm setting the curvature. Once I like the curvature, then I click, and now I'm moving on to the next point. This is another downside to paths, is that they can overlap themselves. One thing that helps alleviate this is to make sure that smoothness is turned all the way up. The further I turn that down, the more likely those kind of artifacts are going to be. And another is to just not use them on too extreme of an angle. So if you're gentle enough with your angles, you won't get overlap. And if you have a really sharp angle that you just can't get it to cooperate with, I have it set to fade at the beginning and the end, and I just terminate that path and then start the next one. But again, unlike an object, a path can have as much length as I want, which is really useful for something like pipes. They just keep going. You can make them do various turns quite easily. It gets a little funky if you're not careful. You can do stairs. Here's a stair path that I have that is transparent, so you can drop that down and then decide afterwards, I want those stairs to be made out of sheet metal or whatever this happens to be, the texture underneath, and now you have stairs. It's kind of just dropping that shadow and that stair edge on top. Paths are great for wires. I use them for this acoustic foam effect that can be quickly laid out across the wall. They can be great for throwing down some quick floor details, like these paths that make it look like it's a metal panel floor. And you can change that color to whatever you want. They're really good for transitions. So if you have an interior space that has two different floor types, it's a really harsh edge there. But with a threshold type path like this, that's easy to fix. And if that was to continue around this corner, then you would be able to make it wrap around. And you can see here, we've got a bit of an issue. It's way too sharp of a turn. Easy fix, just undo, smooth this all the way down. And then the same trick I've shown before, I click to start, and then actually, you know what will make this easier? Let's expand this a little bit first, so that takes up a full grid square. So if you need to go around a corner, you can turn the smoothness back down. I'm gonna click, and then I have the halfway point in the grid. I click again on the corner, once more at the halfway point, and then at my right click at my termination point. So that makes the curve calculated from here to here with low smoothness instead of here to here. If I were to do that, going all the way to here before clicking, you can see that even with low smoothness, it's still cutting on a little bit. With high smoothness, it's even more. So 1, 2, 3, lots of curvature. Then if we click on the half points, less curvature. Another good use for them is to smooth out the transition for a change in materials. It's very similar to this, but because they can curve and twist, it can be a lot more dynamic. So if we have some concrete and we make a shape, by itself that doesn't look great, doesn't really blend in with the environment. But with a properly authored path, see this one here actually has a gradient where it fades out, so it kind of blends in. And you can break it up a little bit as well as you go. I come to this corner and I just curve right around it, no problem. And now it looks a lot more like it belongs in place and a lot less like a old polygonated video game. Things that may or may not be curved in the environment are great for paths. You can have, I've got this curtain, which by itself is great. You don't have to keep placing objects to create your path between 2 points. You can just drag until it's the length you want it to be. Or if you need it to be, you can shift click and make it a curved curtain. You can add lighting effects underneath things. So I've got these glow lighting effects that come in the Cyberpunk asset pack. And I don't know why you'd have blue glowing underneath a rock like this, but if you did, you can add that effect very quickly. You can do railings. So these are glass segmented railings, which can have a curve if you want. Extremely good for fences. This is this month's construction fence with a shadow. And it's got the fence itself, but it's also got the pike that makes the fence post itself. And it just, since it's part of the texture, it lays those out for you automatically. And in the case of this particular fence, it's made of plastic, so it can waver anyway. In real life, these probably wouldn't be perfectly straight. They would probably have some wave to them depending on how hastily the construction site's been set up. And that's something paths can do that is really hard to do otherwise. Another good use for them is scattering details. And I grab these leaves, which are in the HellScape pack, the wastes, I believe. And you can see I'm going completely underneath here. And I'm just quickly throwing out a ton of these leaves that are collected around the edges of objects. The alternative to doing that is just as valid, but a lot slower, and that would be to use the scatter tool and go in here and say leaves and grab some instances of those, and then you could manually add those leaves by clicking repeatedly. But each one of these is an object. I have to manually kind of do this curvature if that's what I want, whereas the paths, they are very, very quick for adding details like leaves, shadows, edges, things like that. Also great for any sort of tubing. Got these giant, maybe ventilation tubes or electrical, because they can have objects along the way baked into the texture. Really good for hanging lights, and even good for tracks, because tracks need to have coherent curvature to them, like so. Some art packs, like mine, will have tracks that are automatically doubled up so that you can very easily create properly spaced out tracks with curvature. And finally, paths are good for objects that may or may not need curvature. They don't have to be things that repeat infinitely. So here's some sandbags. And as you can see, there's a termination point where the bags end. And what this lets you do is draw out your shape a little bit shy of it being complete, holding shift and then clicking. And then I can drag out a curve. And you can see how that pulls on the right side. It pulls the texture in. So that's why I terminated it a little bit before the end, because I knew I was going to pull it out and get that seam to disappear. And now I have my sandbags curved at the exact angle that I want them to be. And then, of course, cracks in concrete, which you might want to set the transition out to shrink. We'll make them do this. You can see it comes to a point. Maybe even turn down the smoothness a little bit. And you can see how you can very quickly start adding tons of detail that would normally be much slower, if not impossible, in other programs. Dirt underneath here. We've got it set to fade on both ends, so it just slots right in. Maybe there's some concertina wire. Probably want the smoothness all the way up for that. In fact, you can just shift click. Although to me, that's a little bit too perfect, so I would do it like that. Road lines, more edges, so broken concrete, transitions for alien paneling or sci-fi paneling, weird, creepy stuff like these organic overlays that go on top of walls, or even an entire set of stairs if you want them to curve. So that's paths, and that's why they're really useful and hard to find pretty much everywhere else. Clip Studio Paint and Dungeondraft are the only programs I've seen that do this and do it competently. And I think that Dungeondraft actually is an even better implementation because of its snap to grid and click and change curvature mode of building that makes it very easy to be accurate and get what you want while giving you the freedom to turn snapping off and do very organic shapes. Check them out. You don't have to use HellScape to use them. Paths tend to be included in all different types of art styles, including the default ones that come with Dungeondraft. Dungeondraft has paths for things like wheel cart paths, footprints, and so on. So that's paths. Give them a try.